After that, we are shown the Lingfeng Gorge. Night had already fallen and the Empress and her subordinates arrived, and all the girls knelt and greeted the master. We are introduced to the third student Ikai and the fourth student Kingeling. The Empress told them to find out where the loophole was. Xiaoning asked the protagonist to stop, but Zhang felt sick because of the flight and threw up everything. The protagonist pretended to be a girl and said he was fine. He just got a little seasick and apologized. Xiaoning began to get angry and said that the local clan disciples still did not know that the man had joined the Jade Goddess clan. But the master asked him to accompany them. In order not to scare the students, she will allow them to be in women's clothes. The voice-altering spell is time-limited, so he doesn't have to beat around the bush. He should just show a little restraint and not create problems, and if he disobeys, he will regret it. The protagonist was afraid of her pressure and agreed with her. Zhang Lan did not understand what was going on and why the master had brought him here. He thought that she had already found out that he had broken into her bedroom that night. Kingeling asked Xiaoning who this girl was. She replied that she was a new student of the master. She brought her here to gain experience. Immediately, the Empress called Xiaoning and she ran to her, and Kingeling turned to the new girl. She began to examine her, and the protagonist was very confused. He didn't understand why Xiaoning had abandoned him and run away. He thought that he would definitely be exposed, and immediately the girl grabbed his hands. She said that it turns out that Zhang is their little sister, and she is her older named sister Kingeling. She asked if this was her first time in Lingfeng Gorge and asked him to let her show her everything. Immediately, she dragged him along and said that they were all good sisters here, and the protagonist wanted to say something, but did not have time. After that, she said that Lingfeng Gorge is the protection of their clan from aliens. Thousands of miles of the Longmen Mountains stretch to the left and right, which even an eagle cannot cross, and only the middle canyon, which is no more than 100 meters wide, can be traversed. Over the millennia, the alien race has tried countless times to counterattack the Huizhou continent through this place, but all their attempts have ended in failure. The protagonist asked Kingeling how the power level is distributed within the alien race. The girl replied that he had asked the right person. She was the best at questions about an alien race. In the alien race, the dominant one is the High Priest, who is good at spells. Their ranks vary in the color of their robes. From the strong to the weak there are red robes, yellow robes, white robes, blue robes, purple robes, and ordinary priests. Below the priests are ordinary aliens. They are good at physical skills, but their fighting power is not particularly outstanding. But they are good at riding beasts. There are all kinds of ferocious beasts in the desert. They are numerous and extremely powerful, and special care and vigilance are needed with them. The protagonist realized that it was no wonder that the power of the high priest he encountered on the mountain was so different from the power of the high priest who attacked the palace. It turns out that the priests also have a hierarchy. Kingeling walked up to the large tent and noted that the protagonist would definitely like it here. Zhang noted that it was a very large tent and he was wondering what was inside. Kingeling thought that she was tired from the journey and suggested taking a good bath and relaxing. Lingfeng Gorge is famous for its hot springs, and Zhang was surprised. The protagonist was confused and replied that he was not tired. Kingeling started to undress and called the protagonist and told him to come in and wash his face while they chatted. The protagonist came to the exit and said that he seemed to hear the master calling him. Kingeling grabbed the protagonist and asked him not to worry, because no one is calling him. She was already sitting on him and asked if he didn't want to wash with her, and the protagonist blushed with embarrassment. He understood that something was wrong. He thought that she had found out that he was a man or that she loved women. Kingeling approached the protagonist and asked if she had hurt him, but she really liked him very much. The protagonist realized that she was a lesbian. A system prompt immediately appeared. The host gave him task number 5. Task category: Login. Time requirement: within 3 days. The purpose of the task is to make Kingeling heterosexual. Punishment: being crushed by 5 strong men. The protagonist said that the system had gone crazy, and this punishment is just cruel. He knew he had to stop her first. The protagonist asked her to wait a minute. First he has to confess one thing. Kingeling stood up and asked if she didn't think she was pretty enough. The figure of the elder sister is one of the best in the Jade Goddess clan, and the protagonist was just shocked. He was bleeding from excitement and he realized that he still couldn't tell her that he was a man disguised as a woman. The girl laughed and noted that he said he was not interested. And as soon as she saw his body, her nose immediately bled. The protagonist thought he was finished. The girl stood up and said she would help him dry off. The protagonist covered himself and replied that he would do everything himself. Kingeling noticed that something was wrong with his voice. Immediately, the protagonist ran out of the tent and shouted that the voice change spell was no longer working. Immediately, Kingling grabbed the protagonist with a ribbon and dragged him back. She grabbed him and threw him into the bathroom. The girl sitting in the water asked how he could fall asleep without taking a bath, while the protagonist, looking at the naked Kingling, was stunned. The girl approached him and grabbed his clothes and said that she would help him undress, and the protagonist asked not to touch him. Immediately, Kingling was surprised when she saw something. The protagonist's watermelons fell out of his clothes and he thought it was over. She grabbed and crushed the watermelon with a squeeze of her hand and noted that it was no wonder now that he refused to wash with her. Kingling hadn't realized yet that the protagonist was a guy and started crying and said it wasn't his fault that he had small breasts. She shouldn't be shy about it. The protagonist was shocked and noted that she knows how to draw interesting conclusions. The girl hugged the protagonist and asked him not to worry, because from now on no one will be able to laugh at him. Big Sister will always protect him. The protagonist got very excited and felt that he was at the top of his life. Immediately, the girl was very embarrassed. She pushed the protagonist away from her and looked down. She began to get very angry and asked what it was. Jiang made cute eyes and said that he wanted to explain it earlier, but didn't have time. Immediately, a strong explosion thundered into the tent and a huge ray flew out of the tent, and the girls were surprised. Ikai, Xiaoning and the Empress were surprised by the noise. Ikai felt an infuriating hesitation and thought that Kingling was in danger. Besides her, she doesn't feel any more hesitation and asked what happened to her, and the girls looked at the red ray. Xiaoning was confused and thought that the effect of the voice-changing spell had expired, and Ikai was at a loss. The protagonist appeared, who was running away from Kingling and asking for help. Immediately, another explosion thundered behind him and the protagonist flew forward. He fell into the camp and the girls screamed that the man was in the camp and were surprised, and the protagonist hit the rock. The system informed the protagonist that his current charge is 120%. A very angry Kingling was walking towards the protagonist and he thought that despite the fact that his body was about to explode, he could not harm this woman. The girl swung her weapon in a rage and shouted for him to die. Xiaoning immediately appeared, who blocked the blow near the protagonist and asked Kingling to stop. The girl shouted that he had deceived her because he was a man. Xiaoning knew this and added that she couldn't kill him. Kingling didn't understand why. The girl replied angrily that he was a servant whom the master had taken to guard the mountain gate. Kingling was surprised. She started shouting that there had never been any men in their Jade Goddess clan, and asked how they had allowed him to guard the mountain gate. Xiaoning whispered in Kingling's ear that the clan master had his own plans in this regard, and therefore she should not fool around. The girl agreed not to kill the protagonist, but as punishment, she would cut him a little and took out her blade, and Xiaoning was surprised. The protagonist did not understand what kind of wildness it was. She immediately ran after him and shouted for him to stop, and he asked her to calm down. The Empress immediately appeared and said that since Kingling was aware, she would not harm his life. Jiang Lan didn't follow the rules, and it was time to teach him a lesson. After that, she told Ikai to show her the distribution of the alien camps again, and the girl agreed. After that, the protagonist hid and using the system noted that this crazy woman did not understand how to calm her down. Immediately, a dagger flew at his feet, but he managed to bend and was scared. Kingling said that she hates men the most in her life and asked how dare he run away from her. For this, he will receive his punishment. The protagonist was very afraid and asked her to calm down. The protagonist took a pill and decided to try something. He immediately began to glow so much that the girl even had to cover herself with her hand. Kingling didn't understand what trick she was trying to pull off. The protagonist seemed very handsome to her and he asked her how she was doing. The girl blushed and did not understand why she felt strange. Immediately, she began to turn her head and tried to wake up. The girl got angry and said harshly that he would pay for it. The protagonist approached her and took her by the chin and asked what price he would have to pay. But the girl did not know what to say. She knew that something was wrong, because she was very excited and even covered herself from embarrassment. The protagonist hugged the girl and asked why she was in a hurry to leave, or she doesn't dare to meet his eyes, and the girl's legs give way. The girl was very embarrassed and blushed and asked the protagonist to leave, because she can't stand it anymore. The protagonist understood that his charm had increased by 300%. It was really powerful, but he did not understand what to do next. He realized that he needed to read more novels. Jiang thought about kissing her hard, hugging her tight, and going lower, but he didn't know where to start. Immediately, the protagonist hugged the girl and took hold of her waist. The girl screamed out of embarrassment so much that the protagonist was even surprised. Jiang Lan noted that she had such a strong reaction, even though he just touched her waist. The girl pulled away and looked at the protagonist a little embarrassed. Kingling licked her lips and said that she would like to see what was so good about him. She knocked him to the ground and noted that if she dared to provoke her, he had to be prepared for her to squeeze all the juices out of him. The protagonist started shouting for her to stop. He understood that she was completely out of control. He doesn't know if she's going to break his pickle. She obviously changed her orientation, but the task was not completed. Immediately, the girl grabbed his pants and told him to take them off. The protagonist blushed and resigned himself to saying that he tried his best. Immediately, the girl stopped and fell silent, and the protagonist was surprised. She got very angry and asked what he had done to her. The protagonist began to cry and did not understand why the pill stopped working at this stage. The girl created a weapon and shouted that she would cut them into pieces. Zhang asked out of fright if she was going to kill him. Immediately, the girl's legs became stiff, just like the whole body. She started to take off and Kingling shouted to be let go, and Zhang was surprised. The girl turned and saw Xiaoning and Ikai. She asked her sister to let her go because she had to kill him. Xiaoning noted that he really changed Kingling's orientation. She was very interested. Ikai noted that Kingling was humiliated, and therefore asked why she saved this man. She replied that if Kingling changed her orientation, then every disciple of their clan would be able to cultivate with peace of mind, without worrying about Kingling harassing her. She found Zhang Lan very useful. Although the protagonist did not hear what they said, he always feels when he is praised. After that, it was early morning and they showed us the camp. The protagonist was sleeping in a tent and coming out of it noted that he was fine. He understood that it was obvious that the charge had reached 120% last night and had not been released. His current remaining energy is 100%. But after sleeping, not only did his body not explode, but his charge dropped to 100%. He didn't understand if the energy had been lost or if his storage capabilities had expanded. Immediately, he turned his attention to the girl who was sitting on the rock behind him. It was Kingling, who was very angry and clutched rocks and popped them. The protagonist laughed nervously and said that he would probably go to the hut. He knew that he must not fall into her hands, otherwise she would tear him apart. Shonen immediately appeared and grabbed the protagonist and told him not to move, but he was surprised. They flew on a sword and he asked her where they were going. The girl told him not to ask what he shouldn't ask. She doesn't know what he did to Kingling, but if he was able to change her sexual orientation, it could be considered a great achievement. The protagonist thought about it and thought that they also want to change Kingling's orientation. She added that Kingling has a strong temperament, and if she really goes berserk, he might not be able to stop her. If he is in danger, he can directly seek help from the clan master. Immediately, the protagonist looked at the beautiful empress, who was also heading forward. He blushed and noted that there are countless beauties in the Jade Goddess clan, but the real incomparable beauty is still the clan master. Immediately, the system informed him that it was giving him a task to log in. Time requirement within 1 day. The purpose of the task, Master Xuaniao must put on the JK uniform. Reward for completion unknown. Punishment, 10,000 arrows piercing the heart. The protagonist was confused by this information. He even started to panic and seemed to turn into a dog. After that, we are shown a certain alien citadel. There were big monsters working at full speed, and they were beaten with whips. Immediately, the Empress said that alien bugs dare to leave the Forbidden Land without permission and disturb the peace. The monsters were shocked by her. There were already other girls around the Empress who were using their powers. She added that today, the army of her Jade Goddess clan went on a campaign to avenge this. The girls launched all their techniques directly at the monsters, from which some could only run away. Kingling was still furious and dealt with the monsters with cruelty. The protagonist saw all this, how she screamed at monsters and killed them, and he noted that this girl scares him. Shonen said that the largest food center of the alien race on the front line was destroyed by them. It definitely exceeds their expectations, and they will definitely calm down for a while. The protagonist didn't know if it was unexpected. The alien race did not know that the clan master would be angry. Couldn't they have predicted it? Zhang Lan asked if there was a possibility that this place was actually a trap, and Xiaoning was surprised. The Empress was immediately surprised and asked again. Xiaoning said that Jean Lan reminded her. An alien race attacking their clan couldn't help but expect them to strike back. This citadel is closest to the front line and is also a food center. She did not understand how the alien race could not take defensive measures and let them attack. She figured there must be something wrong here. Kingling flew up to them and said that Xiaoning was too trusting. All this was coming from the mouth of a liar, and she didn't understand how she could believe his nonsense. The protagonist replied that he was just being careful. The situation is really a bit strange. It's better to retreat first, and then think over a long-term plan. Kingling flew into battle and shouted that it was just ridiculous. They know how valuable this food is for aliens. Whether it's a trap or not, they'll find out after they activate it. She flew forward and destroyed the men and screamed at them to go to hell. The protagonist was a little afraid, because he understood that it was all about personal resentment. Immediately, Kingling opened the door and the guard even flew away. She noted that there were so many food bags, but she had a feeling that they were filled with sand. The monster guard accidentally pierced the bag with his horn and there really was sand inside, which surprised her greatly. At this time, Xiaoning turned around and asked why there was a sandstorm here at this time. The protagonist looked up and noted that this was an even bigger problem, and Xiaoning was very surprised. Huge meteorites like Madaras were falling from the sky. Kingling noted that all the food had been moved, and it was dangerous. Immediately, she was caught in a sandstorm and screamed. The Empress created a shield with the other students and she shouted not to retreat and form a defensive line. Xiaoning told the master that it was worth leaving the attack area first. The Empress noted that it was useless, the coverage area was too wide. If they moved, they would only suffer heavy losses. She asked where Zhang Lan was, and Xiaoning turned around and hoped that he had not fallen down. At this time, the protagonist used 10% of the energy to fly. He had been telling them for a long time that they needed to leave, but they wanted to stay and wreak havoc. Now he had to sort out their mess. First, they used a normal-sized meteor to surprise the enemy. Then they used a sandstorm to limit visibility. And then they dropped a giant meteor unnoticed. He noted that monsters are calculating, but he was sorry that they had miscalculated his existence and he decided to strain himself and release 90% of the energy. And with one blow, he destroyed the meteorite. After that it was over and he was in shock. He began to fall because all his energy was used up. Immediately, someone picked up the protagonist. It was the Empress and she asked if he had destroyed that huge fiery meteor. He was very embarrassed because the Empress was holding him, and the girl was surprised. Immediately, the system reported that it was 100% charged very quickly. A moment later, they lowered it down and Xiaoning flew up to them and told the Empress that Kingling was missing and she had probably been kidnapped. And she has just received a signal for help from the camp. The main forces of the alien race are attacking the camp. The Empress noted that this act of the alien race really opened her eyes. If they return to the camp, they won't be able to save Kingling. She added that she would stay and save Kingling, and they should return to the camp. The protagonist said that this time the alien race was well prepared, and even if the deputy clan master caught up with them, she could become a target and fall into the hands of the enemy. He suggested that the safest solution would be to send someone they have only known for a short time. The Empress was surprised and understood his thought. The Empress, entering the house, called the protagonist to follow her, and he smiled maliciously. After that, they were already inside and she said that she did not know why he was hiding his power, but it was difficult to hide it from her eyes. She asked if he had saved her in her bedroom that night. The protagonist noted in embarrassment that she was wise and did not think that she would find out. The Empress noted that his strength was superior to Lu Xuning's, so she could be sure that he would save Kingling, and also realized that he was the one who saved her that night. Immediately, the protagonist began to fall and Xuanyao asked what was wrong with him. The protagonist was embarrassed by the sight of the Empress and said that this trick with the meteor had exhausted all his energy. He had no strength left. She asked how long it would take to restore his energy. The protagonist replied that the exercises he was practicing were very peculiar, and it was not difficult to recover, but he needed her help. The protagonist handed her clothes and told her to put them on, and he would be able to recover in a second, even if only a drop of blood remained from him. The Empress noted that these clothes were curious, neither linen nor silk, and did not understand what material they were made of. The protagonist replied that it didn't matter, she had to wear it, and that was it. The girl started to get a little angry and asked if wearing this skirt could restore his strength, and he really thinks she's an idiot. The protagonist swore that he wasn't lying. These clothes seem ordinary, but in fact they hide a mysterious power. As long as she wears it, she can channel the spiritual energy of heaven and earth into his body. After a while, she will feel his inner strength and make sure that it is true. The girl thought about it, because since he appeared, he helped them at critical moments, so there shouldn't be any bad thoughts. Besides, she just needs to change her clothes. She's not risking anything, but she blushed a little. The girl said that time was running out, so she would trust him, but only this time. He should also turn away. She will let him know when he finishes changing clothes. The protagonist turned around and agreed with her. After that, the girl behind the bags began to undress. She didn't understand why this shirt was so tight and this skirt was too short. The protagonist replied that these magical clothes must be different from the usual ones. After a moment, the Empress told Zhang that he could turn around, and he agreed with her with a lustful look. Xuaniao looked just incredible, and she noted that it was some kind of strange style. The protagonist immediately covered his banana and was shocked. The system congratulated the protagonist on completing the 6th task. Immediately, the protagonist literally caught fire with power, and the Empress felt a powerful force and realized that he was telling the truth. A huge beam appeared from that house, and it was a crazy upgrade. The system told him that a professional crazy heart was installed. The capacity of the divine body has been increased to 2,000 units, which is equivalent to the 9 heavens stage after 100% charging. The protagonist told her to provide kindling to him. He would return her in one piece. After that, we are shown an ominous alien cave where there were many monsters. There were guards inside and a suspended kindling. The protagonist found her. The locator that he bought with the help of system points is really useful. It was a female locator. The cost is 4 points, and the current balance is 16 points. After that, monsters came into the room, and one said that his master was really smart and had achieved excellent results. This woman has killed countless of his children, and this time he can finally take revenge. When she wakes up, he'll let the boys line up and have a good time with her, and they can throw it into the desert to feed the wolves. The other laughed and asked that they had such an opportunity, and he just wanted revenge, so it was not surprising that their race ended up in this hole. The head immediately got angry, and the other said that if the master had any plans, they could implement them. He said that for thousands of years, the Jade Goddess clan had been able to prevent them from crossing Lingfeng Gorge. This is not because they are powerful, but because of the core of the guardian spirit placed in the gorge. The core of the guardian spirit is designed to suppress aliens, and as soon as an alien enters its sphere of influence, the power of any alien is significantly reduced. The monsters noted that this was true. They tried countless ways to destroy the core, but they could not. He noted that the core of the guardian spirit is the biggest obstacle to the revival of their clan. The gentleman replied that they would have the opportunity to destroy him, as long as he uses a spell to control Kingling's mind. They should let her come back and destroy the spiritual core. The head noted that this was a wonderful plan and did not understand why he did not think about it. His son replied that when it comes to guile and cunning, the human race is not their equal, and this gentleman is indeed the savior of their race. The protagonist overheard all this and realized that it was a good trick to get her to do everything herself. Now it is clear who led the tactics of the alien race. To use a human to help an alien race, he considered him a scumbag. The head said that we need to do this together and cast a spell. Immediately, dark energy began to penetrate the girl. The protagonist, creating fireballs in his hands, noted that the spell is very expensive. He can't miss such a precious opportunity. He immediately put the abilities right into their spell. Everyone was surprised and did not understand what was happening, and at that time everything began to be destroyed. They also thought that the Jade Master was here. Immediately, the head noticed that Kindling had escaped. The monster said it was impossible. She was injured and couldn't recover her strength in 3 hours. Someone took her away. Someone took her away. It's definitely not a Jade Master, it's just a mouse that snuck in. He shouted for them to block all exits and search. The protagonist quickly ran away with Kindling. The girl asked why it was him. She doesn't want him to save her. The protagonist asked, is this a joke? Why does he need her consent to do what he wants? Immediately, he saw in front of him a huge worm with one eye and a huge mouth. He stopped immediately. Zhang unleashed his power on him and shouted at him to go to hell. Immediately, everything began to collapse and he was surprised. They began to fall down and he realized that this mountain was too fragile. After that, they show us the dungeon. The protagonist broke through the ceiling and fell down. The girl flew after him and the protagonist looked at the top and got a little excited. She landed right on his face and he felt great. Kindling immediately stood up and noted that it was quite painful. The protagonist was lying on the floor and Kindling asked why his nose was bleeding and if he was injured. The protagonist was happy and replied that he was fine. The monsters from above shouted that the protagonist had fallen down and they had to report to the high priest. Kindling noted that this was not good, because they had already been discovered. Zhang grabbed the girl's hand and said that everything was fine. There were many passages in this cave. It would not be so easy to find them. The protagonist walked forward and did not understand where this light was coming from, and why this cave was green and bright. She looks really creepy. Kindling asked if they would find a way out. The protagonist looked into the room and was surprised. It was the place where the ancient ancestors of the alien race rest. The protagonist thought that they had fallen into someone's ancestral grave. Immediately, the system congratulated him. He arrived at the secret location of the mission. He receives a reward. Xuan Tian Dan Dian. The download to the brain has also begun. She noted that it is not advisable to stay here for a long time and they should leave. Immediately the download was completed. He assured the mastery of the knowledge of Xuanchen Dan Dian. The protagonist had a headache and the girl asked what was the matter. Jiang turned around and replied that everything was fine. The system has hammered so many things into his head. He's afraid he's going to become schizophrenic because of it. The protagonist asked if she was so worried about him and she didn't fall in love with him. The girl was confused and asked what kind of nonsense he was talking. She said that the smelly man's brain is really abnormal. She will ignore him. From now on, he shouldn't bother her. Then she noticed that the protagonist did not follow her. Kingling returned and asked why he still wasn't leaving. The protagonist took the bone and replied that he knew why this whole cave was glowing green. The remains of these alien ancestors are high-quality medicinal materials. In the alchemical writings, they are called the bones of the soul. The light in the cave is the spiritual energy that these soul bones have lost over the years. Immediately, the monsters noticed them and ran after Kingling. The girl ran up to the protagonist and the monsters said that they could not arbitrarily enter the tomb of the ancestors and they had to leave. The head asked how they dared to break into the tomb of their ancestors. It's not enough to tear him to pieces. The protagonist replied that he advises them not to act rashly. This place is full of spiritual energy, and if he casts a fireball spell, the head knows what the consequences will be. The head shouted at him not to fool around, because they can come to an agreement. If they have any requirements, just specify them and they guarantee their fulfillment. The monster told the others to prepare to kill them with ranged spells. The protagonist asked Kingling how she thought the fireball would take care of them, and she was shocked. Immediately, the protagonist began to panic violently and got scared. The head started screaming, and the monster felt sorry for the ancestors. The protagonist bent his finger and stopped the ball, saying that he was just joking and they should not be nervous. All the monsters breathed a sigh of relief and said that he had scared them and it was not bad. The protagonist turned and a fireball slipped out of his hand, and the monsters were surprised again. The head even tensed up a lot and began to panic. The ball flew straight into the dice and Kingling asked. This time he was also joking. But the protagonist replied in denial and was very scared. Jiang told the system to put all the soul bones in the vault. She said that permission to store foreign objects is not currently included. If he needs to activate it, he needs to pay for a subscription. 3 points for a monthly subscription, 30 points for an annual subscription, 50% discount for new customers. The promotion is limited. Total, 15 points. The protagonist was just in shock. After a moment, the system began to suck all the bones into the vault. He was delighted, because the system managed to save everything and the fireball did not destroy anything. The protagonist said that now they can stop worrying. He grabbed Kingling and shouted that it was time for them to run, and the monsters wanted to kill them. They quickly rushed into the tunnel. The head decided to use the dark forces and shouted at them to stand. Jiang Lan created a fireball and wanted to use it in the chapter, and Kingling told him not to fight them. The protagonist shot a ball into the tunnel so that it began to collapse, but the magic of the head of the monsters got into the protagonist's body and pierced him. Immediately, the tunnel collapsed and blocked the entrance. The head managed to move away, but was angry that he had missed them. Another monster caught up with the head and noted that they had gone into this cave, but there was no way out, so the curse would torture him to death. The protagonist fell to the floor and said that the curse was really terrible. It had a penetrating effect and caused severe pain. Kingling approached him and noted that the white-robed priest's magic attack was very strong and defensible. Ordinary people die from it, but it will survive. Immediately, the protagonist realized that they were at a dead end, and they needed to clear the blockage and get out. However, he must first find a way to contain the curse. The protagonist asked the girl how her body was recovering. She seemed to be trying to seduce him and replied that she was fine. The protagonist blushed at the sight of the girl and asked again. Kingling was excited and replied that she was fine, she was just thinking. After that, everyone else ran up to them and they began to create a huge seal. The head said that this blockage of basalt stone is extremely durable and will weaken the effect of their spells, so they should use all their strength. The monster wanted them to bleed to death through 7 holes today. At this time, Kingling hugged the protagonist's legs and he replied in embarrassment that now was not the time for that. Those aliens outside must be fooling around. They need to figure out a way to get out of here quickly. And Kingling asked him not to leave. Immediately, he came up with the idea that he could use these soul bones to clear. The girl knocked him to the floor and said that this little cutie would not be able to escape. She approached his face and asked if he could help her, because she feels so awkward, and the protagonist was trying to restrain himself. She took his hand and put it on her hip. Then he looked at her beautiful body. Jiang couldn't stand it anymore. This part is really her sensitive spot, and she took the initiative to let him touch her, and no one will be able to bear it. She moved even closer to him and said his name, preparing to kiss him. There was an immediate impact. She was hit on the neck and lost consciousness. He panicked and noted that it was so close that he almost couldn't hold back. He also noticed that although they say that men cannot restrain themselves, but real men should not use a girl to their advantage. He apologized to her, but it was the only way to calm her down. The system reported that its current charge is 180%, and it should release energy immediately. The protagonist asked her not to worry. As soon as he unearths the blockage, he will immediately release her. Just 1% of the soul bones is enough and return them through the portal. He used his power and irradiated himself with the power of bones. The head was eavesdropping and noted that there was no movement and thought that they were already dead. He examined the stones and invited them to clear the blockage and come in to look, and at this time they began to heat up and turn red. A moment later, there was a strong explosion and all the monsters scattered like stones. The monster said they were out and needed to be attacked. All the remaining ones used their powers on them, but the protagonist went ahead with kindling and asked them if they still use curse attacks and assured them that this trick was completely useless in front of their ancestors' defenses. The monster did not understand how this was possible, because all their attacks were reflected. Jiang added that it took less than 30% of energy to refine these 2 sets of armor. He's still holding back. He started creating a huge fireball with the words that now he would have to create a problem for all of them in order to throw out the rest. The head started to panic, because this is the grave of his ancestors, and asked if he could leave everything as it is.